Hello, class. We've now reached chapter 13 in the Gospel of Matthew. And let's look at verse number 1. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the news about Jesus and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead, and that is why miraculous powers are at work in him." For when Herod had John arrested, John the Baptist, he bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, the wife of brother Philip. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod, look at the bullets, Herod Antipas heard about Jesus and his miraculous power and concluded that Jesus was John the Baptist, risen from the dead. John the Baptist had condemned Herod, who was living with Herodias, his sister-in-law. So Herod arrested John and put him in prison. She was his brother Philip's wife. So this was an immoral relationship. Verse 5. Although Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded John the Baptist as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Having been prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me on a platter the head of John the Baptist." Look at the first bullet. Herod wanted to execute John the Baptist, but was fearful, for the people loved John and thought him to be a prophet. But at a birthday celebration, Salome, Herodias' daughter, danced. She so pleased Herod that she foolishly promised her anything she wanted. Her request, "Give me here on his head on a platter," was not her idea, for she was prompted by her mother, Herodias. Though greatly distressed, Herod was caught in a trap, for his oath was at stake. So he granted the wish, and John the Baptist was beheaded. Verse 9. Although he was grieved, the king commanded it to be given because of his oaths and because of his dinner guests. He sent and had John the Baptist beheaded in the prison. And his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took away the body and buried it, and they went and reported to Jesus. Look at the bullets. The disciples of John the Baptist gave his body a decent burial and reported to Jesus what had happened. Herod's act was another illustration of the rejection of Jesus. For Matthew so connected the ministries of these two men that what happened to one was viewed as having a direct effect on the other. Herod, by rejecting the king's forerunner, was rejecting the king who followed him. Verse 13. Now when Jesus heard about John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a secluded place by himself. And when the people heard of this, they followed him on foot from the cities. When he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and the hour is already late, so send the crowds away that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Look at the bullets. When Jesus heard about John the Baptist's death, he withdrew to a remote place. The crowd anticipated where Jesus and his disciples were going. The people walking along the north shore of the Sea of Galilee joined Jesus. Feeling compassion, Jesus healed their sick. When evening came, the disciples wanted to send the crowds away since there was not enough food in that remote place to feed the people. But Jesus said that they do not need to go away and to give them something to eat. However, they only had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So look at verse 17. The disciples said to Jesus, "We have only 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Ordering the people to sit down on the grass, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward heaven, he blessed the food. And breaking the loaves, he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. They picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 full baskets. There were about 5,000 men who ate, besides the women and children. Look at the bullets. With these elements in Jesus' hands, a miracle occurred. That is, the 5 loaves and 2 fish. The bread and fish continually multiplied, so that all present ate, and they were all satisfied. More than enough was available, for 12 basketfuls of broken pieces were left over. About 5,000 men were fed on this occasion, plus many women and children, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 in total. Look at verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray, and when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Jesus look at the bullets, sent the disciples away in a boat. After dismissing the crowd, he went up into the hills alone to pray. But soon the disciples were in a storm. Somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, that is the 4th watch of the night, Jesus joined them, walking on the water to their boat, a distance of 3 to 3.5 miles from the shore. His power over the elements was obvious, but there was also a lesson of faith for the disciples in this experience. Look at verse 26. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. And they said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. Look at the bullets. The disciples' fear of seeing a ghost was relieved when Jesus announced that it was he. But Peter wanted greater assurance than that it was really the Lord. He said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." The Lord's reply was a simple, "Come." Peter's initial response demonstrated his faith, for he stepped out of the boat and began walking toward the Lord. In all recorded history, only 2 men ever walked on water, Jesus and Peter. Verse 30. But seeing the wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, Peter cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." But look at the bullets. Peter's faith was challenged when he saw the effects of the wind on the water. As he sank, he cried to the Lord for help. Immediately, the Lord called him. Jesus rebuked Peter for his lack of faith, which had caused him to sink. When they reached the boat, the storm calmed, and the amazed disciples worshipped him. Their concept of Jesus had expanded, and they acknowledged him. Verse 34. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word into all that surrounding district and brought to him all who were sick. And they implored him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched it were cured. The bullets. The disciples' view of Jesus was in direct contrast with the men of Gennesaret, a fertile plain southwest of Capernaum. When these men learned Jesus had arrived, they brought all their sick for healing. Their touching his cloak recalls a hemorrhaging woman in that area who had touched his garment. Though they acknowledged Jesus as a great helper, they did not fully comprehend who he is. The disciples, however, were growing continually in their comprehension of their true identity. And that concludes our lecture on chapter 14 of John's Gospel.